Hello, this is George Hutton, and you are listening to the Mind Persuasion Podcast. Today we continue our study of money brain. For more information, please visit mindpersuasion.com/money-brain. In today's podcast, we continue our study of different kinds of money, particularly fiat currency. If you read the Bible, you know the part where God says, "Let there be light." In Latin, this is said fiat lux. Fiat means let there be, and lux means light. So essentially, fiat money is when the government prints money and says, "Let there be money." If only all of us could do that. Right now, the entire world uses this paper money. Up until recently, the dollars used in the United States could be redeemed for actual silver. This was essentially the same setup that had been around for potentially thousands of years. You did work and got commodity money, silver, in exchange. You put that commodity money in the bank and they gave you slips of paper that could be taken to any bank and exchanged for that silver. This meant that people would accept that paper as if it were silver. But then World War II happened and the world decided they needed a new monetary system. Here we must be careful. It's a common understanding that winners of wars write the history books, and since the United States not only won World War II, but they did so by using 2 nuclear bombs, they essentially were in a very powerful position, one that allowed them to essentially define the global monetary system. Our point here is not to say that was good or bad, only that we don't have much of a choice other than to take their word for it. But the system we have now is a global paper money system. Now, one argument is that this is a system backed by debt, meaning the United States Treasury sells Treasury bills to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve gives them money in exchange for those Treasury bills, or IOUs. Where does the Federal Reserve get the money to buy the government IOUs? They print it, or rather they conjure it up electronically. This is explained clearly on the Federal Reserve's official documents. It's not a secret. Another argument to describe our current monetary system is that the United States can print dollars, or more accurately, the combination of the Treasury and the Federal Reserve, and everybody has to use them. Citizens must use them, as using any other currency is prohibited. Other countries are strongly encouraged to use them. Without going too far down the rabbit hole, the United States, or more accurately, the Federal Reserve at their behest, prints dollars and people use them, and that's that. The reason why people use dollars isn't really the most important point for our purposes. The main point for us is the reason we use dollars is we have a very strong idea that we can use them in the future to buy stuff. However, this situation won't likely last forever. There will come a time in the future when people would rather use money other than the US dollars. When this day comes, it won't be a pretty sight. From a purely economic standpoint, studying what happens leading up to, during, and after a currency shifts from being worth less and worth less to actually becoming worthless is interesting. This generally happens under hyperinflation. The less people trust the money, the less it is worth. This means the more of that same money is required to buy the same thing. For example, if any given currency is stable, it might take 1 unit to buy a loaf of bread. But once inflation kicks in, that same loaf of bread might cost 10 units, then 20 units, then 100 units, and even 1,000 units or more. This is common and has happened several dozen times in various countries over the past century. From an economic objective standpoint, this can be an interesting thing to study. But from those living within a society with a slowly dying currency, it is one of the most horrible things to experience in modern times, short of outright slaughter. Imagine having a job where you can just barely pay the bills. Now imagine your pay is only going up 10% a month, but the cost of everything is going up 50% a month. It's one stunning fact of history that every single society that has ever existed has collapsed. And many historians have found that when they do collapse, a collapse of their monetary system goes hand in hand with a collapse of society. Why does any currency start to become worth less and less? structure of inflation. When the cost of stuff increases, this is commonly referred to as inflation. But as Nobel Prize winner Milton Friedman noted, inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon. This means that the only reason general prices can rise is if the amount of money is increasing. A very rough description is that before the inflation starts, there is a certain amount of money and a certain amount of stuff. Then the people in charge start to realize their economy and their reason for being in charge is slipping out of control. So they basically create more money to hopefully spend to stimulate the economy. A rough metaphor would be an alcoholic who wakes up hungover and decides taking a few shots of whiskey might ease the pain. It will, but only in the short term. When they print more money, it helps in the short term, but it tends to make things worse in the long term. So, when things get worse, they print more money. This strategy of slowly increasing the money supply can work for a while. If you look at the average prices of stuff in the United States, it has been slowly increasing for the past 100 years. This is only because the money supply has been increasing for the past 100 years. One way to measure this is the size of the U.S. debt. In the United States, every time they increase the money supply, they increase the debt since all new money is backed by debt. A similar thing happened during the last few hundred years of the Roman Empire. They didn't have electronic or even paper money, but they did have something similar. They started out with coins that were close to 90% silver, but as the decades wore on and the economy weakened, the coins became less and less pure silver. They collected coins at 90% silver, for example, melted them down, cut the percent silver in half, and doubled the number of coins. When Roman money died, their money was nearly pure copper, not a precious metal, and not suitable for commodity money. And the silver paint on the outside would essentially flake off. Once people lost faith in the money, the collapse of society was not far behind. So the reason prices keep getting higher is that the money supply continues to increase. Inevitable. Two things seem to be inevitable. We all know that humans are born, we grow up, and then we die. We all know this as we all have relatives and friends who have died, sometimes of old age, sometimes unexpectedly. People's dying is something we all expect. When it happens to us, it can be something that is very hard to accept. Denial is a very common response to being told we are going to die soon. We humans simply do not like to accept bad news. It may even be a function of our evolution to simply reject bad news until the bad news forces us to accept it. This may be a survival trait, and that we keep pushing on despite the odds telling us we are doomed. Perhaps this is the human spirit. Perhaps this allowed us to continue to expand all over the planet, figuring out how to live in places that seemed impossible. But one thing we have not experienced is the death of society or the death of money. Yet history tells us that these two events are just as inescapable of our own eventual death. Another strange aspect of history is that most societies were equally aware that the survival rates of all societies and monetary systems that came before them was zero. But at the same time, they thought that it wouldn't happen to them, and then it does. We may currently be living in a relatively stable society with a relatively stable monetary system, but as the saying goes, this too shall pass. As much as we absolutely do not want to accept it, all humans die. All human societies will come to an end, and all monetary systems that seem to be the lifeblood of every society will also come to an end. It's very tempting to see this happening in real time and make the assumption that because we can see it happening, we can stop it. Consider that this may be just as futile as a bargaining stage that comes after the denial stage when facing our own demise. I'm George Hutton. Thank you for listening to the Mind Persuasion Podcast. For more information, please visit mindpersuasion.com/money-brain. I look forward to speaking with you again soon.